Hi there, and welcome to Talking True. I am really thrilled today because I have a special guest who's joining me for an in-depth conversation. We're going to be diving into the theme, how to avoid spiritual rabbit holes. And today my guest is Alastair Ballentyne, and he's joining me from the UK, from what's the name of the place again?
I'm in the smallest county in the UK called Rutland.
Rutland, that's right. And actually, funny enough, I was there 2 years ago. It's very beautiful. And we're going to dive into the conversation and get started. So, Alastair, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really looking forward to this in-depth conversation. So
Thank you
let me
for
just
having me.
you're welcome. So let me just say one of the reasons I invited you on was because I saw you on Threads. I saw some of your posts on Threads and on Instagram, and I said this is a man after my own heart because he speaks with compassion, but very direct, and also with a sort of a no tolerance with respect to BS, and especially with respect to what often happens in the spiritual arena. And I know I've spoken about this before, but I would love to dive into this conversation about what some of the spiritual rabbit holes can look like. You know, if you're not kind of mindful and aware, you can kind of go into sort of treacherous or icky terrain. So let's start there, Alastair, shall we? Do you want to dive in and share?
Yeah, I'm happy to do so. Spiritual rabbit holes are one of the big topics of our time. And I feel we have to be quite careful about how we address this because no one willingly goes down a rabbit hole that is bad for them. And it's very important for us. There's lots of conversations around we have to be discerning or we have to trust our own judgment. But in spiritual seeking and in the spiritual journey, we tend to find that the spiritual seeker is very open, very vulnerable, very easy to be influenced. And it's difficult when we now have access to such information and a lot of things online, they tend to come with an agenda behind them. And ultimately, the rabbit holes and the conspiracy theories and that kind of stuff, I'm not saying that there is no such thing as any conspiracies, because of course there are. It's a crazy world that we live in. But some of them, they get sucked down into these pipelines, into these very isolated and extreme situations of separation, ultimately. They tend to think that it's all about love and love is the answer, and they become quite hateful situations. So it's a very delicate and nuanced path. And ultimately, for me, the main thing that we need to be aware of is when something is pulling on our emotions. And it's not that we should separate ourselves from emotions. It's not that we should pretend that emotions don't exist. It's that our world runs on a form of emotional manipulation at every level, whether you open a book or you turn on the TV or your device or you see an advert or you turn on the radio. Something will come on inevitably within a few minutes that is designed to make you feel something. And if you can feel something, it will then influence your decision making. And we need to recognize that with the internet, that's become incredibly easy to do because our world, as magical and fantastic as it is in many different ways, it's important to not get swept up in the more fanciful stories because we then miss the magic of the everyday world. And it is very easy and comforting to fall down these rabbit holes because if you suddenly think that, life has been a certain way because everything is against you and here's the reason, and everyone bands together around something that they're afraid of or something that they're ultimately angry about, with all respect to everyone, this is the oldest trick in the book. This goes right the way back to the formation of the first cults, the first religions. And as they grow, the idea that if you're inside the group, you're saved or you're chosen, And if you're outside of the group, bad things will happen. So it really is this kind of thing that we are living in cycles. And if we don't recognize that we're living in the same cycles that we always have done, we'll be doomed to repeat them. Particularly in the last few years, everyone's going to have a different opinion on this. That's fine. But from 2020 and everything that happened there, was a great test of humanity. Various people will talk about how we're moving towards a state of a unity consciousness or a planetary oneness and all of these kind of things. But what people don't seem to acknowledge is that when we face tests as a civilization, how we respond to those tests defines if we're ready for the next lesson or the next stage or the next evolution, shall we say, and ultimately how we responded as a civilization to the pandemic. We failed the test, and if we look at it at the grand level, because it was a totally unknown quantity for all of us, and everyone sought comfort and solace in the various different things that they did. And within that, it's important to not give each other a hard time, but it is also important to recognize that if we're going to progress into a future that has an emerging spirituality on one hand and human innovation and science on the other, the two are not mutually exclusive. We've got into this culture of one trying to debunk the other, and it's fighting. And when we fight with each other like this, we don't progress. We're easy to be controlled. We're divided and these sort of things. So the rabbit hole, while it might seem comforting to have stumbled on this great secret that the world is run in this shadowy way and there's this small group of people influencing everything, and maybe they're space lizards or whatever nonsense people have been smoking online, it's a comforting thing to show that the world is messed up and we don't understand it, and it's complex and nuanced in a way, and it's structured in a way to benefit a group of people, and the group of people are just folks who want to make money off everything, and when we simplify it, it's that idea of the simplest explanation is usually the way. We don't have to turn it into this shadowy conspiracy. We don't have to turn it into anything like that. We end up trapping ourselves in these stories. People talk about we must escape the matrix and all this kind of stuff, and it's like, well, hang on a minute. Why is it that the people talking about this kind of thing really seem to be living in this mental prison, living in this prison of emotion, living in a world which is incredibly partisan, and all of these old narratives and stories that we can trace back for millennia? It's very bizarre to me, I must say, because I personally, I'm a mixed race person. So I'm half Scottish-Celtic, half Persian-Iranian. And I grew up with a lens on the world that was ultimately a foot in two very different cultures. Even though I was born in the UK, I grew up in England. I've lived in England most of my life. And it's interesting because for many years it was the idea was you had to erase one part of yourself to fit in with the culture at large. And then over time, when you start to integrate these two things together, you see that the Western way of thinking, where everything has to be reduced to an atomic level to understand it, and then there's the Eastern way of thinking, where everything is expansive and oneness, and there's an interconnected. We need to bridge the two, because we're approaching, with the example of 2020 and pandemic, all this kind of stuff, we're approaching a situation that required us to think bigger and then reducing it down to atoms, which was not possible. So this is why people are coming up with these different ideas. Suddenly you get a jab that's wizard poison or some nonsense, or if you care about other people, you're supposedly a bad person. And for me, it felt that this time we needed a change in the spiritual landscape. We needed a change in practitioners. We needed a change in, dare I say, leadership, and folks out there sharing message. Because in a time of darkness, spirituality can bring comfort and it can bring meaning to suffering It can't superimpose lessons on things. We can only divine the lessons after we've been through something. But most people were not giving themselves the chance to even enter the classroom. And that, for me, I felt was the real shame, because we're going into this state of being where we need to work together, we need to pull together, we need to keep each other sane. But then everyone's freaking out.
Yes, yeah, I mean, absolutely well said. And let me just let viewers know who might not know Alastair. He's a fifth generation spiritual advisor and teacher, so he knows what he's he knows what he's talking about, and he's been working with people for many, many years. And I would really echo what you've just said, because what I found is that with many of the people that I work with, and also what was reflected from some spiritual communities, is a willingness or a drive to jump onto conspiracy theories. And again, I'm not disputing, I'm not saying that they're all fake or whatever, but let's say the more bizarre, conspiracy theories. There seemed to be a tendency to jump on those as a way of finding relief, rather than looking at and really, doing some inner work and meeting and greeting the anxiety that was naturally coming up, or the fear that was coming up around lockdowns and the pandemic and all of those things. There's a tendency to want to run away from all of that and to look for people to blame or groups to blame, and do a lot of finger pointing outside of oneself, rather than actually sitting with the discomfort, and really welcoming it and having conversations and meeting and greeting it. And of course, all of that is about shadow work, working with the shadow. And it's also about understanding the importance of not getting into sort of a spiritual bypassing kind of mode or momentum, which also seems to be prevalent and is running behind these tendencies to want to look outside, oneself, to blame groups or the greys or whatever it is, the white hat, the black hats, whatever the story is, and that has been very, I would say, very evident, certainly with respect to some of the communities and some of the people that I've worked with over the last few years. So we're definitely on the same page, and it's really all about having the courage to look at what's coming up, right? And also listening. My big thing always when I'm teaching, whether it's adults or teenagers or whoever, it is always about trusting what feels right for you, listening to your intuitive guidance, acting on what you're hearing inside, not allowing somebody to run their narrative dressed as a spiritual narrative onto you, to sort of bring you into this kind of state of hypnosis. And also a feeling of you're being invited into some sort of private club that knows more than anybody else, as you said, this exclusivity, we know that and they don't know. So it just always comes down to looking at what feels right, what's coming up, owning what's coming up, having a conversation with it, and kind of taking blinkers off, I would say. So, all of that takes tremendous courage, and it takes commitment, because it's not a quick fix. It takes work, it takes effort, it takes commitment, it takes doing whatever the practices are that feel right for you, and just keeping at it, not giving up. So those are some of the big spiritual rabbit holes that I've seen. And the other thing that I've spoken about, and I believe you've spoken about it too, is the sort of preponderance of courses and programs that have been offered. And I think it's grown, it's mushroomed since the pandemic, which offer, high ticket courses and programs that offer fast track enlightenment, how to be enlightened in a weekend. And again, I've had experiences with clients that have come to me and asked You know, they were about ready to sign on the dotted line with courses and programs. You know, one that stands in my mind was a woman who she was from the UK actually, and she said it was a 6 weeks program. It was an in-depth, you know, really powerful, you know, elevated. Only the best of the best could join. It was a small group. There was only going to be 15 or 20 people, and it was $6,000. And she didn't have the money. You know, she only worked part-time. She got 2 kids at home. Should she do it? And the promise was enlightenment at the end of 6 weeks. And so I've seen a lot of that. And the other thing I've seen a lot of is tiered programs where there's level 1, level 2. You know, you get to level 2, and then level 3 is like another 10,000 or something.
Yeah.
You know, and I mean, I'm laughing about it, but it's kind of gross. I'm sorry, but it's kind of gross, because the bottom line is, no one can teach you the truth of who you are. You have to discover that within yourself. Teachers to that, but sitting in a retreat that costs you, I don't know, thousands of dollars, isn't going to give you sort of fast track enlightenment. That's just not the way it works.
And enlightenment is not a thing that you can sell. And this is one of, I'm so glad that you mentioned this, because I moved in that world for a bit as well. You know, I'm a teacher. I have my own courses. You know, run a tarot school and do spiritual classes and this kind of thing. And it's interesting when you see that landscape of like, yes, this is the quantum pizza with the electric kebabs of Metatron and all whatever it is. That it's kind of like, let's just throw all the words in the blender here, and then whatever kind of sticks out, and then however many words there are, we'll put another 8 on the price, you know, and all the prices are matching numbers, and is designed in a way that cheapens this stuff. Because I'm sure you do, I do myself, but you know, when you see the matching numbers on the clock face, you know, this kind of like the little synchronicities and stuff, very obvious spiritual moments where you just get like the kind of the overall energies going, yeah, man, it's cool, you're on the right track. You see like 11-11 or 22-22, something like that. Beautiful moments. And these courses take those beautiful moments and kind of use them in a disingenuous way. And you tend to find that a lot of these people running the courses haven't even got their own lives together. You know, it's mad. It's absolutely mad. And I've been teaching many years, and I was a performer many years before that. And there's a thread that runs through all of this. And when you spot it, it is hard to ignore. And a lot of it is performance. It's, you know, we call it the performative spirituality, how Instagram reduced spirituality to an aesthetic, you know, and just kind of picking and choosing different cultural things. Or let's take this deity from this tradition and that deity from that tradition, and all this kind of thing. And, you know, I've seen practices emerge that, you know, there's one of them, I won't name it because I'm not that guy, but there's one of them where they're taking a tradition from a community in South America and then something from Southeast Asia and just going like that. And it's a bit kind of like, well, hang on a minute. And the person who did it isn't from either of those communities. And you know, the commodification of spirituality, you know, what's the best thing that, you know, sells? Fear sells. Oh, if you don't do this, you're not ascending, this kind of thing. Because that's the big one.
Yes.
5th dimensional ascension.
Yes.
Like,
yeah.
it's how colourful the language can I use on this fine show of yours?
It's bullshit. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm with you.
It is, because it's just rebranded rapture, you know,
Yes.
and the rapture is a load of crap anyway. And it's these things where this idea that if you do not do this, you're going to burn forever, or you're going to get vaporized, or this whole, Yeah, and again, you see these stories, you see the fingerprint of them coming back through these very high control tactics. You see it in online coaching, not just spirituality. And there's
Mm-hmm.
that dovetail at the moment with, sort of woo sprinkled coaching and all this kind of, the energetic alignment program, all this kind of crap. And it's fascinating because ultimately the message is with everything: if you refuse to go through the doorway of this program, if you refuse to sign up to this group, if you refuse to do that, bad things will happen, or you're going to be left off of the club, or you're not going to get beamed up by the Pleiadians when they come and
Yes.
probe everyone. Well, these kind of things. And when we start to look at it like that, I always invite everyone ask the same question of themselves. Does this belief or practice serve to connect us more with our humanity, or does it serve to disconnect us with our humanity? And it's interesting, we have to be nuanced in some of this stuff, because I would say there is a lot of bad faith actors in what I call woo age spirituality. So, because a lot of new age stuff is interesting, but when it comes to the idea of spirituality that has risen up in the 20th century as a result of a more globalized community, so we're connecting up and we're exploring different ideas and absolutely fascinating. There's some great stuff if we respect the lineages, respect the teachers, respect the soil that the plant was planted in, not just try and take the leaf and sell it as the Bodhi tree, like, this is it, I've got the definitive thing. And then when we go down that way and we start to recognize, okay, well, there's a lot of universal truths, it starts to get easier to see the snake oil salespeople. Like, for example, there was the, real fantastic example is the documentary about the Twin Flames cult that's on Netflix, and the Amazon one as well. Like, I've been in groups that, that's a very extreme example, but I have been in groups that have been on that spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
Not all of them spiritual groups, some of them business communities and things, where it is they will try and control the way that you think and the way that you see the world. And the idea, it plays on the oldest fear that we have as humans, which is ostracization from the community. So when we see these very powerful mechanisms of control, and we see these very powerful hooks that they have into our minds, it becomes very difficult if we have not done that first thing of learning the landscape of our emotion, learning the things that trigger us. Because ultimately, with all of this stuff, there's a grain of something plausible, but then it expands into complete insanity. Like, half of the world has drunk the Kool-Aid right now. And if we're talking about a new world or a new earth, the new earth is the earth that we already have. We've got to take better care of it. The new world is the one where everyone of all backgrounds, race, colors, identifications, self-designations, however you want to put it, everyone's got a seat at the table. But what people aren't recognizing is we've got a whole load of work to do before we can even consider that. And folks want to bypass that and say, oh, no. But, as a mixed race person, to me, the minimization of stories and struggle of different cultures and communities is like the cardinal sin in all of this stuff. And when it comes down to it, we see it so much online where people will talk about channeling, and they, and it positions their teaching as somehow divine and infallible. So there's a fairly prominent business community online that it's mainly geared towards one particular gender identification, and the leadership of that community talks about channeling and downloads and all of this kind of stuff, and it pulls people in. And the idea is that you can't criticize it because it's a divine download. And if you do criticize it, oh, are you against it because it's empowerment? So are you then against empowerment? They have all these straw man arguments that they'll throw out there to try and throw you off the scent. So when you are in deep, it becomes harder to leave, because you start doubting your own thinking and your own logical reasoning. And another thing that I think is like the biggest tool in the box that we can have is just ask yourself, is this logical? When you come across a practice or an idea or a teacher, because there's amazing teachers out there. Threads has shown us one thing, is that there is an amazing community of people in spiritual work, astrology, healing, psychology, all these intersections, and the various sciences, that coagulation that's happening. I think it's beautiful, but every one of us is all kind of under the surface, but we're kind of like bubbling up. And I think that it's very important that we see this as everyone has this one kind of common denominator, which is it's logical, it's grounded, it's inclusive. There isn't a secret thing going on. If you want to work with them, you've got to pay them. That's fine. That's cool. That's the world we live in. But it isn't a case of, if you don't work with me, you're a bad person. or if you say no to this group program, bad things are going to happen. Or, all this kind of stuff. And it's wild to me because, so with I know there's a lot of people who they go through courses and they train, and it's great. That's cool. I support that. I came the other way. In that, I remember my first kind of contact with this stuff was watching my grandmother read coffee grounds as a kid, and then them telling me about my great grandparents being spiritual healers and seers and this kind of thing, and then going back further from that, the kind of the ancestry and things, and into the unknown. To me, doing this work is the biggest sacred responsibility I can imagine. I didn't come out until I was 35. And, I'd also trained as a teacher post-grad as well, before any of that. And there is a discipline, and there is a dignity, and there is a commitment to walking the way. And there are certain things you can't do and certain things you can, because you need to embody the example. What we don't see, we're kind of in the rabbit hole world, we don't see any of that.
No. But if I may, I'd love to jump on a couple of things you said, because there's such a powerful resonance. One of the things is that over the years, I have worked with clients who suffered horribly within spiritual communities and within cults. But in some of them, actually the ones that suffered the most were in spiritual communities that didn't present as cults. So they were kind of drawn in over time. Then they felt like they'd invested so much time with this group, they were afraid to leave, because they were afraid, they'd been told that if they left, that they would never attain enlightenment. They had to stay with this particular teacher or this particular group to attain the highest. So that was a huge fear, because they'd invested so much time and energy. And then there was one case where there was a woman that had been with quite a well-known teacher, guru, or whatever you want to call him, in the US, and she was just treated horribly and abused in front of the group, and had paint poured over her, and all kinds of things, really, really abused in horrible ways, and shamed because of something that she'd said or something that she hadn't done, in terms of her practices, and this kind of abuse has a terrible effect psychologically. And then the other thing I've seen as well with people who have an earnest desire to know God, to know truth, get so turned off by having these encounters and experiences, they just don't want to have anything to do with it, have to, with anything, even trusting their own sort of innate knowing.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that I have seen that I've tried to work with that has been quite prevalent, and particularly since, you know, we had the lockdown, the pandemic, and all of that, because there were a lot of teachers and gurus that were sprouting up and taking advantage of these business opportunities that were becoming more easily accessible because people had more time. So there's all of that. But again, it just keeps coming down to always listening to what feels right for you and trusting that. And also the big thing that I wanted to say based on what you said was honoring your story. If you're in a community or you're studying with a guru or a teacher who doesn't allow you to speak to and share from your own direct experience with respect to your story and honor it, then run. because your story is part of, you know, your journey and understanding who you are, and obviously understanding that you're more than the story, but the story is really important, and honoring that is really, it's invaluable. You really have to kind of start from there. And again, with a lot of people I've worked with, what I've noticed is they want to bypass their story. They want to deny their story. They want to sort of run away from their story, thinking that if they do the practices enough, they'll be able to escape the pain. And of course, you can never do that, because you have to sit with it and go into the pain and acknowledge it and work with it and so on and so forth. And all of these things are part and parcel, I think, this whole movement we've seen towards, you know, conspiracies and looking for, you know, quick enlightenment programs. And it's really just all about bypassing and not really wanting to look at what is hurting within you.
Yeah, absolutely. And it causes them to willingly wish to forget what it means to be human. And I think the spiritual journey of every human to some degree is striving, and we're striving to become more of ourselves. We're striving to polish the mirror within to reflect more light, however you want to put it. And it's interesting when we get into this kind of guru situation, and I think we need to be careful, because it spreads across so many different things, spreads across so many different cultures and ideas online specifically, where people just want your money, you know, and they'll say and do anything to get you in, and they'll make all these promises, and it's almost like, again, it comes back to emotion, and they will play a symphony on your heartstrings before letting you think for yourself. And that's dangerous. It's really dangerous.
Yes.
And, you know, this very charismatic leadership, and everything's very highly controlled, highly constructed. And, you know, there is some good stuff now, in that people are seeing beyond that. People want real, people want connection. They're, you know, more interested in ideas. It's less about aesthetics and these kind of things. But I think ultimately we have a glut of this in the West, because in the West we have completely severed our connection with spirituality in any kind.
Yes.
We sacrificed it through the Enlightenment, shall I say, which, you know, of course, was essential for development of society in certain aspects. But through colonization and religion being used as a tool of colonization, we've removed any kind of personal spiritual inquiry. Anything outside of the fence gets called demonic. Oh, it's kind of horrible stuff. And what we don't realize is there is a wealth of spiritual realization in all things. And to me, to add a spiritual realization to something, it's to express yourself fully. It's to see deeper into something. And when we are discouraged from going on the personal spiritual journey, it's because it's to keep us rank and file into whatever there's the vested interest at the time. Why are we not calling that the conspiracy, rather than people sort of willingly running to that now, you know? And there's one of my favorite quotes about the sort of this spiritual, mystical, personal journey. I can never remember who said it, but the quote is, "The psychotic drowns in the same river in which the mystic swims with delight."
Yes.
And if we don't have any grounding, if we don't have any knowledge of self, if we're not looking after ourselves, if we're not, aware of ourselves and the world and all the things, and we've done all of the human stuff, we've gone to therapy if you need to go to therapy, eating well if you need to eat well, which we all do, getting enough rest, get hydrated, all these other things, then if you're out there swimming in the river, it's full of wonders, but there's going to be something that swims past you like, my goodness, what is that?
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned about the shadow work as well. One of my friends is a teacher of mine, the only person I've ever kind of considered close to a guru, essentially for myself. Nepalese guy. I met him when I was 18. And our paths cross every few years. And he just kind of kicks the football and I go after it. And he was telling me last time when we sat down with each other about 4 or 5 months ago that when he was meditating, he got really into meditation. He said he started seeing all of these creatures all kind of coming at him like, blah, and like these like demons and stuff. And he just thought, you can't hurt. I'm just sat here chilling. You're on another plane. I'm here. And he said they then started turning into saints and these kindly people. And it was almost as if he rationalized it as they were kind of poking at him. You could see, what are you doing in our house, man? What brings you here? How is your intentions? And what you were saying about people wanting the enlightenment now, there's a wonderful book I'm reading called The Nirvana Express: How the Searching for Enlightenment Went West, and it talks a lot about from Victorian times through the 20th century about how the West's fascination with the mystical East and all this kind of thing. And there was one person in that where I've got to in the book, it's kind of like mid 20th century, and about like Meher Baba and all these kind of people. And there was someone who came to one of the ashrams and was like talking about, well, I want enlightenment now. I want it now. I don't want to wait. I want it now. And we see this kind of teaching and this idea that, spiritual awakening has levels, as if it's a hierarchical judiciary formation of the universe. That was an Alan Watts thing. He said that actually, that in the West we have this hierarchical view of the heavens and of God, and he sits at the head of it with the gavel and all this kind of stuff. And whereas with the East it's very integrative. Again, it's all oneness. There's no separation and all this kind of thing. It was very challenging for the individualist, exceptionalist West and all this kind of stuff. And it's fascinating because these are the things that we get taken advantage of through.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're not aware of that, it becomes very easy for someone to come out with their 8888 enlightenment course, 5-week group program, raise your vibration, all this kind of stuff, these terminologies, because we don't have that connection with spirit. And when I say spirit, even that is a loaded term in itself, because people will talk about, I channel from spirit, but what is spirit? Is spirit a word that we use to describe oneness, or is it a word that people are using to describe all of the deities, beings, practices, visions of gods as well, with polytheistic pantheons that have been appropriated and colonized out of their original roots, and now it comes back as this friendly, nice, catch-all spirit. There's this terminology.
Mm-hmm.
And it's fascinating to me personally, because again, when we start to peel back the layers, we can see it like the onion, if we want to. It gets a bit rawer each time, or we can see it like the lotus flower unfolding in the mucky water of all of these other things, and then this great beauty appears in the murk of it all.
Yeah.
And within that we recognize that, okay, so we're working in this realm. We're working with these ideas. We're working with these fragments and aspects of divinity, consciousness. We're pulled towards certain practices, certain ways of being, certain ways of doing things. We start learning the lineages of things. We start learning the threads that they're connected to. We see this absolutely beautiful, magical, fascinating, layered and nuanced tapestry that is the human story that we are continuing to weave with every passing day. And that, I believe, is what the people who go down the rabbit hole are searching for, personally.
Yes. I mean, I love what you said about the lineage, because based on everything I've said today in this episode, I'm absolutely not against authentic gurus, authentic teachers, and so on and so forth. My story is, which I've told many times, I was raised a Catholic, and I had this incredible lucid dream where I was given initiation by an avadut, a great master yogi who was renowned in India, and that was my introduction to Shaktipat, the awakening of the Kundalini and the spiritual energy. And what I can say with absolute authenticity and integrity from my own direct experiences, I've never been asked by Nityananda or by the organization or the lineage that he represented. It is no longer in his body, but I've never been asked to do anything that runs counter to what is authentically, feels right and real for me. And I've lived true to that. And I've been taught to honor that always, and to honor the story within that, and within that sort of journey and sort of progress or process. So finding someone, or kind of being pulled as I was into a relationship with an authentic master or a teacher is a whole other story. Yeah. To finding somebody online who just decides to pitch up and has no kind of lineage behind him or her, and just decides to be a guru so that they can make a fast buck. So again, lineage is it's just key,
Yeah.
And that is one way, I think, of really testing if you find you're attracted to a certain teacher or a guru. Just look and see who was their teacher, who is their teacher's teacher. Where does this teaching or kind of program, where does it originate from? Where does the message come from? Because unless he or she has that behind them, it's often secondhand knowledge. You'd also see a lot of that. Somebody who's kind of studied a few gurus or teachers' words, and then they're trying to promote and sell from what they've learned from a book. And of course, that doesn't mean anything. You're not going to be able to facilitate any kind of transformation in a student unless you've gone through that yourself.
This is, I agree with all of that, and if I may tack on to, I find the biggest tell as a teacher is the ones that I want to work with. I don't see them centering themselves in this. So when I connect with them or I see them online, the thing that they're leading with are the ideas. And throughout all of the ideas are things that serve to bring us closer together. And to me, that's always the biggest green flag waving around. Like, oh, okay, cool. And also a sense of humor.
Yes.
Well, because to me, there's, in the Western side of things, it's become so painfully serious. And, we see this a lot in the, social media as well. Some of the different creators, they're like, I demand to be respected. And it's like, why? Let's have some fun, let's joke and laugh and enjoy ourselves and share ideas. And when we kind of look to the Eastern side of things, there's a playfulness, there's a joyfulness, and there's a levity to the teaching and to the practice and the process, that if someone is leading with the ideas, and if someone is also knowing how to, or laugh at myself or the world and the spectrum of beauty to horror that we live in, and not laughing at the horrors. I don't mean it like that. I mean it like still finding that capacity within that full awareness. Then to me, that's like, but it's when folks make it about them, they make it about their experiences or why we should look to them, rather than why we should, maybe they can take us on a guided tour of this landscape with these ideas. Then I have some questions.
Yes, yes, I'm absolutely with you. I mean, we could go on at length about all of these things, but this is the world we're living in, right? And it's so important to just kind of really look at things closely before you sign on the dotted line and commit to either paying high prices for courses and programs or committing time and energy to it.
Yeah.
It's never ending. So anyway, I'm just noticing the time. I feel like I could talk to you all night, Alastair. Honestly, we could just keep going and going and going. So I mean, I would love to invite you back if that's something that you'd like to do. No pressure, of course.
No, count me in. Count me in.
I'd love that, because I certainly have learned a lot and enjoyed speaking to you, and we're definitely on the same page. And it's just great to hear it from your perspective, across the other side of the world, but it's the same.
No, I love talking about this stuff. I could talk about it for days at a time on end. So yeah, happy to continue some other time. Absolutely.
Good. Excellent. So before we kind of close off, do you want to just let folks know where they can find you? I know you're on Threads, right? Do you want to just talk a little bit about where you are?
Yeah.
On social media.
Okay. Well, rather than in my wonderful armchair that so like I say, humor
Yes,
is key.
yes. It looks comfortable.
Yeah, so you can find me at highertransmissions.com, and I'm aware that is a very audacious name, and for me the name was all about trying to help connect people with their own higher transmission, so that's where that comes from. Yeah, and what I do is I run a tarot group, because tarot reading is one of my things, and tarot is one of the easiest ways for people to get into self-knowledge, spiritual practice, and working with energy as it flows through our world. So we have an online tarot school called the Tarot Circle, and I'm also an EFT practitioner. So like I've been talking a lot about the emotions, one of the things that I do, I'm really interested in, is practical spirituality. So we don't necessarily sit around doing very conceptual things. I like to work with people. So we're tapping on the meridian points of the upper body, discussing emotion, doing kind of like a reprogramming in a way. It is an evidence-based practice. There's a very good book called The Science of Tapping by Petter Stapleton that has all the research and bits and pieces that you can check out. And then with tarot, for me, a lot of it is to do with self-analysis and self-examination. I also offer readings there as well. And I run events, online events, obviously accessible for people around the world. And we'll be doing some stuff here in the UK this year as well. But all of that will be through the Higher Transmissions portal. My handle on Threads, Instagram, and TikTok is Higher Transmissions as well. So you can find me at any one of those places and connect. And I also do mentorship and working with people on a one-to-one basis based on their needs. So yeah, there we go, a few different things.
Excellent, fantastic. And I'll put some of the links, or all of the links if I can, in the show notes so that people can just kind of click and go, which will help. So Alastair, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been an absolutely amazing conversation. I really enjoyed it very much, and I'm sure viewers will get a lot from it too. I really appreciate you, and I appreciate the work that you're doing. Thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you being here and connecting, and for getting a chance to chat with you. And for everyone who may be watching this, hello from what you consider to be the past to your present.
Yes. So thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate you joining me as always. If you enjoyed this episode, then please subscribe if you haven't done so already, and spread the word. So that's us for now, over and out. Take it easy, be well, and see you soon. Bye.
Bye.